Welcome to the Church Doctors Podcast with Scott and Marla Sheely. The Church Doctors Podcast is brought to you by Outpouring International. Love God, love people.
That's right. We do love God and we do love people. And one of the ways we're doing it is bringing guests on the show who have extraordinary stories to tell about how their lives went growing up and how they met the Lord and the miraculous things that God has done to put them back together and make them a new creation in Christ Jesus. And one of the best people that I could think of to help share that story is my friend Matt Turner. Glad you're here with us today, Matt.
Thank you, Scott. It's good to be with you.
And I met Matt, 3 or 4 years ago, and it's one of those relationships where just like after 5 minutes of talking, we're like, I like this guy. I want to be around him,
Yeah,
and it's been like that ever since. And so if you have friends or relationships like that in your life, thank God for them. That's certainly, Matt, your life's been a gift to me and my family. And anyway, Matt, there's a line that you use, and I can't remember how to quote it, but when you describe yourself, it's like twice dead or something like that.
Twice resurrected.
The opposite, because you're a Christian and you're heading toward you're heading toward the other way.
Yeah.
Twice resurrected.
Yes.
Okay, so now we're going to start from back farther before that point. That was a teaser.
Yeah.
So now you're going to have to listen to the podcast to find out where that came from. So you grew up in Texas, in South Texas.
And actually Northeast Texas.
Texas.
Well, kind of central Northeast, but Midlothian, Texas.
Yeah.
My parents owned a store and kind of a hardware auto store. And so I grew up with parents that were very hardworking people, very intelligent, but not as educated.
Yeah.
They were, they were overachievers, that kind of folks. I mean, I had a father who was easy to climb up in his lap. He didn't feel like he was going to get rejected or pushed away. He was not saved. He wasn't walking with the Lord, and then my mother, up until I was 6 years old, was wonderful. We had a great relationship. But then when I was 6 years old, something happened, and I was laying in bed, and I don't know why I was asking this question. I think it had something to do with, actually, I may have been 7 years old, but I was laying in bed and I was asking this question from God, and I think it had to do with watching the gal who went through the Holocaust. Right now, her name is escaping me, but she talked about forgiveness and talked about God a lot, and so she was actually in my first grade class, and there was, I think it was all the way up to fifth grade that they were having all these kids. And, I was just a first grader, but some of her words stuck with me. And so when I was in bed that night, I'm laying there, and all of a sudden, I asked God a question. I said, who created you? And who created the one that created you? And who created the one that created the one that created you? And suddenly, God's presence enveloped me and overwhelmed me. And I felt like a microdot, in the universe, but at the same time, I wasn't diminished. Like I knew God's love surrounded me. There was something about this feeling of being enveloped in God. And and I've had this feeling probably, I bet 5 or 6 times in my life that it was that powerful. And so the next, I think it was 3 nights later, that I had a terrible, what I would call a night terror. I wasn't asleep, but I had this hooded figure attacking me in my bed with a knife. I wasn't asleep, and I started screaming. Of course, my parents came running in, and so they asked me what was going on, and I told them, I saw somebody in my room with a knife who was going to stab me. It had a hood over his head, and so I didn't know enough to ask anything at that time. Later, God reminded me of that time in my life that had happened, and he spoke to me. This is much later, and he said, the enemy has been after you for a long time because he knew there was something that I was going to do special with you. And so that was actually the time when severe abuse began to happen in my family. My mom and dad began to fight. There was a tremendous, evil that entered our home and would attack my mom. I think that the things that she was going through later that I found out was a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, and the enemy was attacking her. And I call it demonstrating. She was demonstrating what the enemy was doing to her. She was demonstrating that on me. There were times where she would get on my chest and be choking me out to the point where I would almost pass out. She would chase me down with a glass bottle, hit me on the head, or even a golf club once. Split my skull open. I had to get stitches, and the tale to my dad was that I'd run into a fence with my bicycle, and I was threatened to not ever
Don't tell the truth.
Yeah, don't tell the truth. And there were other things that were really embarrassing and humiliating. The worst thing, I think, was probably the words. I wish you were never born. You've ruined my life. I hate you. And then definitely a lot of cuss words or, terrible words to use on a child. So that was when I was 7 years old, 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
And I didn't know it, but what had happened was my aunt had come to visit my parents, and she spilled the beans on the fact that my mother had slept with my dad's brother, actually 2 different brothers, and that I might not be from my father's loins.
And that's what triggered your mom.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I didn't find this out until just 2 or 3 years, 2 years ago, I guess. Yeah, 2 years ago. And so all this time I lived with not understanding why. I grew up within this system of abuse that was almost daily, of shame and blame. I had my parents didn't go to church at that time at all, and they ended up purchasing this store that I ended up being raised in this store that they owned as a White's Auto Store. And when they did that, my mom began to go to church. And the church that she went to was really odd. There was pastors and elders, swapping wives and just all kinds of weird stuff going on. But my mom ended up leaving and running off with a pastor. And I, I don't know or understand all the shame that she was going through, all the feelings she was feeling, but her and my dad were constantly fighting. And I come to find out later, a lot of that was about me and the way she'd treat me. Well, one day my dad comes to me and says, "Hey, your mom wants to come back. How do you feel about that?" And, I'm just like, well, if she'll let me play football and quit beating me, then that'd be fine, And little did I know that she had actually, her lawyer had threatened my dad that she would come and take me away. And it was kind of hushed, the fact that I biologically may not be my father's, but that would be the reason she could take me away. And she would also take his livelihood away. Mm. So, it was a terrible time in my life growing up in that. And I eventually began to use drugs, smoking pot and doing whatever. And I got to the point where I was stealing from my parents' store, to supply my habit. I knew how to work hard, but I made these excuses in my mind. Well, they're terrible parents. He's not protecting me, and she's doing this to me, and I'm just gonna, steal a bunch of tires and go sell them on the market or sell them to somebody, and that's so I just turned into a little thief, I despised women, and I transferred what my thoughts were about my mom and her authority onto God. Yeah. The way that I saw her was how I saw God. We started going to this little Assembly of God church, and it was a lot more normal, but it was definitely religious. And I remember that there was two men in my life who really affected me, who I saw Jesus in them. One of them was Brother Woodall. And Brother Woodall was this guy that was older. He worked, he owned a bookstore for the Assemblies of God College in Waxahachie. And Brother Woodall was the sweetest guy. He would come and just lay his hand on my head or my shoulder and look at another person that would be in front of us, and he'd start talking wonderful things about me. Wow. And he'd say, because my nickname was Stormy, he would say, that Stormy, he's just a wonderful fella. And he's just the kindest. He loves everybody. And he just would go on and on and on. And me, I'd just be eating it up like a little puppy. I just all that care, all that love, and all the words of affirmation, that I was getting from him was blessing my soul. And I drank it in like a parched land, And then the second person was Keith Green. Keith Green came into our little Assembly of God church, started playing the piano and singing "You Want to Go Back to Egypt," and I thought it was the coolest thing. Yeah. But then he started into worship, and I fell in love with worship that day, with worship music, and I really enjoyed it. And I begged my parents to get me a drum set. Of course, that old Pentecostal church, they didn't really do drums, so it took some tall talking to the pastor to get that to happen. But I actually started playing drums, at this church. But the abuse continued. The abusive words continued. There was nothing I could do that was right. Everything I did was wrong. Even if I was telling the truth, I'd be accused of lying. And I mean, I would never be believed, even if I was telling the truth. So all of that really damaged my identity and my psyche in a pretty bad way. So the way that I treated girls was pretty terrible. I didn't honor them at all. I had been taught, stuff about sexual, pornography and the things that go along with that by another kid that was much older than me. But and that's usually how it happens, you know.
You had no example of how to treat anybody.
Exactly.
No way to follow after.
Yeah, exactly. So I when I ended up, I don't know how much of the story to tell, but some of the things that God did in my life to keep me from dying was amazing, because I had thing after thing after thing that could have happened.
I can remember a few that you've told. Running from the cops in a car, driving too fast, doing even in one part of your life, you were got involved in trafficking drugs and running, getting in a crowd where if you did the wrong thing, you were going to get shot.
Yeah, they pulled a gun on me
all the time
in a hotel room. In a hotel, and the police showed up right then. I had a pair of nunchucks, and the guy was about to shoot me.
Wow!
And the police saved me, but I think more than that, Jesus saved me. It was a sting that was planned, at this place, and I didn't know I was even in the middle of it. Yeah. So I ended up, I ended up going that day, that night after when that happened, I ended up going to jail for a week. And the next day, after getting out of jail, I went to work. I went back to work for this guy I had been working for. And the guy, he was a jailbird himself. I mean, he was a little drug dealer. But we were building buildings, metal buildings, and he had run out of money, and so that's why I was doing the drug deal for him to be able to get some money, make some money. And so I went back to work on this job site in Arlington, Texas, on top of a house of a wealthy attorney. And I was up on top of the roof and had a pry bar in my right hand, and I was walking to the edge of the roof, and I didn't realize that they had built the power lines that go from house to house right over this house. It wasn't a service line, it was power lines, 7,200 volts. And there was a tree grown up around these wires, and so I couldn't even see them. It was
For all of you that don't understand volts in electricity, he just said that line is 7,200 volts. The voltage in your home right now that you plug in your toaster is only 115.
Yeah.
So that's like thousands and thousands of volts bigger than what your house has.
Yeah. So I just was walking to the edge of the roof, was moving the branches to the tree out of the way, and my left hand come into contact with the bottom wire, and the top wire arced over to the pry bar on my right hand. So the electricity jumped, and it jumped through me. It killed me instantly, and I was on a flat part of the house, the flat part of the roof. I fell down on the roof. I was dead, and my hands were, I'd left skin on both the pry bar and the wire, where my hands had gotten burnt so bad. And I'm dead. This is back in 1984. There was no 911,
Right.
First of all, they didn't even know what had happened. All they knew was that the transformer had blown, they didn't, and the electricity was off, the other people that were building and working on the house. And, so they're looking around trying to figure out what's going on. And then finally one of them goes up to the top and he finds me and I'm dead there. And, so they called the emergency vehicle, and they came, and it took over 20 minutes for them to, that's the estimation. So during that time, I don't. It's hard to explain because you don't really know. This is my near-death experience, but it wasn't near. Yeah, I was dead.
Yeah,
I was there.
Yeah,
and so I'm experiencing what I've come to know. I think is outer darkness. Like there was this place of complete darkness, no light whatsoever. There was nothing of God there for me to interact with. There was nothing that, because we're designed by God to interact with His creation. So that means that this table that these microphone stands are sitting on, that's wood. God created the trees, Well, man interacts with that wood and creates a table because we are made in His image. We create.
Yeah.
And so there was nothing in this place to interact with. There was nothing of God there. There's something about interacting with God's creation that's a glory, that's part of His glory. And so there was nothing there. I mean, I was more than bankrupt.
Yeah.
I was below zero, in whatever you want to call personality or in any kind of thoughts or relationship with God. All I knew was there was nothing of God there.
Wow.
It was torment to my soul. People talk about the torments that people are going to go through hell. What does that look like? The torment of just being absent from God's creation.
Yeah.
was just terrible, terrible.
Wow.
So I ended up, suddenly coming back into the here and now, so to speak. But I was floating about 30 feet up above my body. And I'm watching these people who had me strapped to one of those boards that they strap you to.
Yeah.
And they were lowering me off of the roof. And I'm like, what is that? All of a sudden, boom, I'm back in my body again. And because my hands were so burnt and in pain, I'm starting to scream bloody murder. Well, these fellas that was taking me off the roof, they was lowering me thinking I was dead. And suddenly I start screaming. Well, they almost dropped me and killed me again because it scared them.
Yeah.
And so they get me off of the roof and they get me to their truck and put me in the ambulance and take me to the hospital. And, 3 days later, they had to amputate my hands because the gangrene had started to set in. And they weren't able to save anything in the muscles or anything in my hands. They were just
had been burnt too bad.
Burnt to a crisp.
Yeah.
And so that's the first resurrection. The book is called Twice Resurrected.
Yeah. Matt wrote a book about this.
So, and it's free. It's a free book. Before they took my hands, my dad I can hear my dad in the conversation with his doctor, and he's saying, please just take some of the tendons and muscles from my hands, give my, this is a father that I find out later may not be my biological father.
And he was willing to give up part of his body for you.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so my mom, and I'm not trying to paint her as a villain. This is just where she was at in her life. And I'll explain some of that a little bit later. But so my mom was bending over saying, if you just give your heart to Jesus, you're going to get to keep your hands, and a little bit of transactional relationship with, with God, and God don't work that way,
No.
And so,
there's you don't make a deal with God.
and so my family was just kind of beside themselves. They didn't know what to do. And they took my hands off and I started, They wrapped my arms up, and I was, it was a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of torment, a lot of confusion, and a lot of medication,
Yeah.
So I ended up having to go back to my parents' house after all this, which I hadn't lived with them for a few years, and my mom would go street witnessing out on Greenville Avenue in Dallas every Friday or Saturday night, and she was gone. I'd been home for maybe 2 weeks, and I could, my arms are all wrapped up, swollen up the size of a football, the end of my arms from my elbow down, and so I had to hold my arms up above my heart, because if I put them down, the heartbeat would go through them, and oh my gosh, it was just so terrible. The pain was because my nerves had been fried, and so I ended up having 2 girls from church come over to see me. And it's just me and my dad there, because my mom had went out on the street witnessing with a bullhorn thing. And so these girls had said, "Hey, we want to take you to a movie." And my dad was ecstatic. He was happy because he wanted his son to begin to get some kind of a normal life going,
Yeah.
Well, these girls invited me, and they were really good Christian gals, and so they took me to a movie, and I'm having to walk around
With your arms up in the air.
yeah, like one of those cactuses, and so I'm walking around like that, and I come back home when they drop me off, and I am getting through the door, and my mom meets me there. And she's got a big stick, and she is accusing me of being, this everything you can imagine. And she starts whipping me with that stick over the head, and I didn't think about it. I just put my arms up to protect me. And oh my gosh, it sent me to the ground. I was screaming out like an animal, and my dad, he come running out in his underwear, and he's like, "What's going on?" And my mom accused me of attacking her. I'm like, with what? And I got so angry that I told them, I said, if you ever hit me again, I'll lay you out with my feet, so I, that reaffirmed a continuing burning anger at my mother. So soon after that, within, I don't know, a couple of years, let me go backwards. About 7 months later, I ended up getting prosthetic arms. Like they call them hooks, or, and I got really adept at them. I could do just about anything with them.
Yeah, I've watched. It's amazing. Yeah.
So I ended up getting a settlement a couple years later, and in that settlement, I got enough money to try and stuff as much fun or crazy or whatever in this hole in my heart. So what had happened, back when I felt this emptiness of God, I came back from being resurrected, determined that I was going to be a good boy, that I accepted the transaction my mom had offered me.
Yeah.
And it was basically the way she lived her Christianity, and so I tried to live out that I'm going to be a good boy, I'm not, but that doesn't fill you up. It doesn't give you what the soul looks for, and so, when I ended up getting all this money, the opportunity to fill my soul up with something else was there. And I began to take advantage of that. And I began to do drugs and buy fast cars, and I filled my life up with all these crazy things. And I didn't have, I'd gotten married, and I had 2 kids at the time. My wife and I were getting in a divorce, was going through a divorce. And I had come to a place where I didn't really have anything left to live for. My mom had attacked me in the store. I took some of the money and bought into my parents' store, and so I co-owned it with them. And she attacked me in the middle of the store, and then she tripped over some boxes and ran to the back, very embarrassed because she realized that she had lost her temper in front of about 10 or 11 people, and she hid out in her office. And during that time, I had these. It had to have been Holy Spirit that was talking to me, because I wasn't in shape. I was getting drunk all the time. Couldn't do drugs because having to be drug tested, for my kids with the divorce. And so I was drinking all the time. And my mom, she went back and hid out in her office. And the Lord was talking to me and for 3 days, and was reminding me how my mom had been molested by brothers, and how she had been terribly abused by her mother, and several other things that had happened to her. She had lost 2 children. One died in her arms, a newborn, and then another one was stillborn. And she was broken, and so I just got to that place where I could see that my mom was in a cycle of anger and hate.
Yep.
So I went back to her office, and I knocked on the door, and this was totally Holy Spirit, because I wasn't mentally capable of doing this, or even emotionally. But I knocked on the door, and she let me in, and I told her, I said, I know I haven't been the best son, and I'm really sorry, but I remember you and I going on vacations together, and us singing Statler Brothers songs, and really having a good time, and I want you to know that I'll always love you, and you'll always be my mom no matter what. Well, she started crying like something broke in her. I think she got saved that day.
Yeah.
I think she got to that cycle of shame and guilt and brokenness just all crumbled right then. And something changed. Well, several months later, I'm still going through a divorce. I'm still drinking a lot, and I'm walking through this store that my parents and I co-owned together. And it was at night. The store was shut down. All the employees were gone except for me, locking up the store. I'm walking toward the back, and all of a sudden, Jesus stepped in. He stepped right into my life, like physically. Yeah. He was there.
Yeah, he could see him. Yeah.
He was glowing, and I couldn't see strong facial features, but he was glowing. His glory was so powerful, and I could see this TV in front of him, almost like a video TV. And I'm watching my life played out in front of me. And, I'm going to Fat Daddy's bar, right? Like, that was what I was going to do. And Jesus steps in. It's not like I had these wonderful thoughts, just he stepped in to my life. And I'm sitting there watching this video of my life, reminding me when I was 7 years old and had this encounter with God, and then the enemy attacked me a few nights later, and I'm watching my life deteriorate and all the things that had happened, the pornography, the way I treated women, all those things. And I saw that that once, all these things had sunk in, then the depravity of my own soul began to invoke sin upon other people. So sin begets sin. Yep. And I just became so overwhelmed, and I said, God, why? Why did you do this? He said, I never wanted this for you. This is not my plan for you. It's not my plan for anyone. And I said, but you're God. You could. Right. He said, I didn't create you to be a robot. I created you to be a son. I created you to make your own choices and decide to be with me. And I just became so overwhelmed watching what had played out in my sin and sins that had been perpetrated on me. And I just melted into the floor. Wow. Wave after wave of love just kept washing over me again and again and again. And I knew the love of God and the value of God for the first time ever in my life.
So there it is. There's a second resurrection.
It's a second resurrection.
Once were dead.
That's right.
And now you're alive.
That's right.
And it's amazing to me. A lot of people think that, okay, you have to understand how all this works. You have to do the right thing, say the right thing. None of that's true in any of this story.
That's right.
Because you didn't understand what forgiveness was. You didn't even use those words.
That's right.
And yet your mom got it.
Yeah.
She got the fact that you were forgiving her and that you were extending to her some compassion.
Yeah.
And I just love that. I love the fact that I know a lot more of the story, of course, that we can tell just in this short podcast of how seeing the years and years later how God has used you and turned your family into a beautiful garden.
Yeah. And
how you've been able to extend that love to many other people and counsel others who are in similar spots where they think it's impossible.
Yeah.
And we've seen God bring healing and change in many, many lives. And I just want to invite anybody that's listened to this story, if that's you, if there's, a lot of this happened behind closed doors where nobody knew what was going on. It's just a businessman in town, a family. He's playing football, he's going to school and everything, and maybe people don't realize what's going on behind closed doors. If you're stuck in that situation, there's hope. If you're going through abuse and you don't deserve it, you're just stuck in the middle of a place, there's hope. And the hope is Matt said it already. He's waiting for you to hand it all over to him and to receive that resurrection for you. If you need that, he's right there. He's so excited to receive you into his family. If you've done that and you're still in a hard place, there's a way out, and the way out is to realize that you're not responsible for carrying the shame.
That's right.
You're not responsible for the darkness. You didn't make that up. You didn't choose that, and so offer yourself back to God. Offer yourself, give him everything you have, and you'll start seeing the light of God come into your circumstance, in your situation. So thank you so much for being here with us today, Matt.
It was a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity to share my life.
And as always, if you heard Matt's testimony and you'd like to contact him about sharing that in your church or getting a hold of his book, you can contact us through our website at the end of the show, and we'll put you in contact with Matt. If you're stuck and you need prayer, you need ministry, of course, we would love to help you with that too. So let us know. Thank you for listening to the Church Doctors today. And like and share, give this show away to people who need to hear this message, because I believe this was a timely thing that somebody needs to hear this. God bless you all.
Blessings.
Thanks for joining us on the Church Doctors Podcast. For more information or to contact us, please visit our website at outpouringintl.com.